"Mom, I need you to do me a favor. When you get to the dinner tonight, don't tell anyone you're my mother." Those words came out of my son's mouth on a Tuesday afternoon in March, right there in his kitchen with the marble countertops and the fancy espresso machine that cost more than my monthly pension. I was holding a casserole dish, because that's what mothers do, isn't it? We show up with food and love and hope that somehow it's enough. David didn't even look at me when he said it. He was adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror, the one with the gold frame that Vanessa picked out from some boutique in Manhattan. His reflection stared back at him, and I watched him practice that smile he uses, the one that doesn't quite reach his eyes anymore. My name is Margaret Sullivan, but everyone who's ever cared about me calls me Maggie. I'm 73 years old, and I live in a small house on Maple Street here in Greenwich, Connecticut. I taught English literature for 42 years at Fairfield Academy, one of those preparatory schools where the children arrive in cars that cost more than most people's homes. I taught Shakespeare and Toni Morrison and Maya Angelou to students who went on to run companies and write laws and change the world. Or at least that's what I told myself on the hard days. I've been a widow for 8 years now. My Thomas passed on a September morning, and I still sometimes set 2 coffee cups out before I remember. I thought retirement would mean more time with family, more dinners with my son David and his wife Vanessa, more afternoons with my granddaughter Emma. But lately I've been feeling like a guest in my own family, an uninvited one. Now, before I go any further, I want you to do something for me, sweetheart. Down there in the comments, I want you to tell me what city you're watching this from. I want to know where our stories reach, how far a voice like mine can travel. Because right now, standing in that kitchen, I felt very small and very quiet. And I need to know that someone out there hears me. So go ahead, honey. Tell me where you are. I stood there with that casserole getting heavy in my hands, and I heard myself say, "I don't understand, David." My voice sounded strange, like it was coming from somewhere far away. He turned then, finally looked at me, and I saw something flicker across his face. Not quite guilt, not quite pity. Something in between that made my stomach turn. "It's just for tonight," he said, using that smooth tone he reserves for business calls. "This dinner is important for my career. Very important. I just need you to keep a low profile. Can you do that for me?" Vanessa walked into the kitchen then, her heels clicking on the tile floor like little warning shots. She was wearing a dress that probably cost what I spend on groceries for 3 months, and her hair was styled in that way that looks effortless, but takes hours and hundreds of dollars to achieve. "David, the car will be here in 20 minutes, she said, barely glancing at me. Then she looked at the casserole in my hands and wrinkled her nose just slightly. "Oh, you brought food. How thoughtful. I'll have Maria put it in the refrigerator." Maria is their housekeeper. I've met her exactly 3 times in 5 years. "Who's going to be at this dinner?" I asked, and I was proud that my voice didn't shake. David exchanged a look with Vanessa, one of those married couple looks that excludes everyone else in the room. "Just some clients," he said. "Business people. Nobody you'd know." He said it kindly, like he was protecting me from something, but it felt like a door closing. Nobody you'd know. As if my 42 years of teaching the children of Connecticut's elite meant I lived in some separate world where I couldn't possibly understand his important business dinners. I should have said no right then. I should have put down that casserole and walked out of that house with my dignity intact. But you know what I did instead? I nodded. I agreed. Because he's my son. And because somewhere deep in my heart, I still believed that if I just tried hard enough, if I was just accommodating enough, he'd remember that I'm his mother, that I'm the woman who sat up with him through every fever, who worked 2 jobs to keep him in that fancy prep school after his father died, who believed in him when nobody else did. "What should I wear?" I heard myself ask, and Vanessa's eyebrows went up just a fraction. "Oh, you're coming?" she said, and there was something in her voice that made me wonder if David had even told her he'd invited me. "I mean, of course you're coming," she corrected quickly. "Wear something simple, nothing too colorful. It's a sophisticated crowd." She said sophisticated the way you might say contaminated, like sophistication was a disease I might catch if I wasn't careful. David kissed Vanessa on the cheek and grabbed his briefcase. "I have to get back to the office for a few hours," he said. "Mom, be here by 7. The car will take us all together." Then he was gone, and I was left standing in that kitchen with Vanessa, who was already looking at her phone, dismissing me without words. I set the casserole on the counter and let myself out through the back door, the one the service people use. I drove home in my old Toyota, the one David keeps suggesting I replace with something more reliable, which is his way of saying something newer that won't embarrass him in his driveway. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. "Don't tell anyone you're my mother." The words kept circling in my head, like birds that couldn't find a place to land. I thought about my Emma, my granddaughter, who used to spend every weekend at my house before Vanessa decided she needed to focus on SAT prep and violin lessons and all the things that would get her into Yale. I thought about Thomas and how he'd always said David would grow out of his ambition, would remember what mattered. But Thomas had been gone for 8 years, and David had only grown more distant with each promotion, each bigger house, each step up the ladder of success. When I got home, I stood in front of my closet for a long time. "Something simple," Vanessa had said. "Nothing too colorful." I pulled out a navy blue dress, the one I'd worn to my retirement dinner at Fairfield Academy. It was elegant but understated, the kind of dress that let you disappear into a room if you wanted to. And apparently, that's exactly what my son wanted me to do. I sat down on my bed and looked at the photographs on my dresser. David at his high school graduation. David and Vanessa's wedding, where I'd worn a beautiful lavender dress and felt proud and hopeful. Emma, as a baby, sleeping in my arms. When had it all changed? When had I become someone to hide instead of someone to celebrate? But I'll tell you something, honey. Sitting there on my bed, looking at those photographs, I made a decision. I would go to that dinner. I would wear the simple navy dress. I would keep a low profile just like David asked. But I would also keep my eyes open. Because something about this whole thing didn't sit right with me. Something about the way David couldn't meet my eyes. The way Vanessa looked surprised that I was coming at all. The way they both seemed nervous about this mysterious, important dinner with people I wouldn't know. 42 years of teaching had taught me one very important lesson. When people hide things, there's usually a reason. And when they ask you to make yourself invisible, it's because they're afraid of what you might see. I had no idea, sitting there on my bed that March afternoon, just how right I was. I had no idea that by 7 o'clock that evening, everything I thought I knew about my son, my family, and my own life was about to turn upside down. But I'd find out soon enough. I spent the rest of that afternoon trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe David was just stressed about work. Maybe Vanessa was having one of her moods. Maybe I was being sensitive because I was lonely, because the house felt too quiet without Thomas, because Emma hadn't called in 3 weeks. I ironed the navy dress twice, even though it didn't need it. I polished my good shoes, the black ones with the small heel. I put on the pearl earrings Thomas gave me for our 30th anniversary. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a respectable woman. A woman who'd spent her life teaching and caring for others. But I also saw someone trying very hard to be invisible. At 6:30, I drove back to David's house. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and the neighborhood looked like something from a magazine. Perfect lawns, perfect houses, perfect lives behind perfect doors. I wondered how many of those doors hid the same kind of secrets I was starting to suspect lived behind David's. When I rang the doorbell, it was Emma who answered. My granddaughter stood there in a beautiful dress, her long hair pulled back in a sophisticated style that made her look older than 16. For just a moment, her face lit up. "Grandma," she said, and she hugged me tight. I held her close and breathed in the scent of her shampoo, the same lavender kind I used to buy for her when she stayed at my house. "I didn't know you were coming tonight," she whispered in my ear. "Mom and Dad didn't tell me." Before I could respond, Vanessa appeared in the hallway. "Emma, go finish getting ready," she said, her voice sharp. "Margaret, you're early. The car won't be here for another 20 minutes. She looked me up and down, and I saw her mouth tighten just slightly. "That dress is fine," she said, which somehow felt worse than if she'd told me it was all wrong. Fine. Like I was acceptable enough not to cause a problem, but not good enough to make anyone proud. David came down the stairs then, looking like he'd stepped out of a business magazine. His suit probably cost more than I spent on groceries for 6 months. He barely glanced at me. "Mom, good, you're here," he said, checking his watch. "Listen, when we get there, I need you to understand something. This is a very delicate situation. These people, they're not like us. They're very successful, very influential. I just need you to smile and be pleasant, but don't try to join in the conversations. Just let me handle everything. Don't try to join in the conversations." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "David," I said quietly, "who exactly is going to be at this dinner?" He exchanged another one of those looks with Vanessa, and I was getting very tired of being on the outside of their silent communications. "I told you, Mom. Business clients. It's a corporate dinner. Nothing for you to worry about." But I was worrying, because in 42 years of teaching, I'd hosted countless dinners for colleagues, administrators, and parents. I'd sat at tables with senators and CEOs and Pulitzer Prize winners. I knew how to navigate sophisticated conversations. So why was my son treating me like I couldn't be trusted to behave myself in polite company? The car arrived, a black luxury sedan with a driver who held the door open for us like we were royalty. Emma sat next to me in the back seat, and she reached over and squeezed my hand. David and Vanessa sat in front, whispering to each other in voices too low for me to hear. Through the window, I watched Greenwich slide by, the town where I'd lived for over 40 years, where I'd taught hundreds of students, where I'd built a life. It felt strange to be moving through it like a stranger, like someone who didn't belong. "Where is this dinner?" I asked, breaking the silence. David cleared his throat. "The Whitmore Estate," he said. "It's a private venue, very exclusive." I knew the Whitmore Estate. It was one of those grand old mansions that had been converted into an event space, the kind of place where hedge fund managers had wedding receptions and corporations held galas. I'd been there exactly once, for a fundraiser Fairfield Academy had hosted 15 years ago. It was beautiful and intimidating in equal measure. Vanessa turned slightly in her seat. "Margaret, when we arrive, there will be a receiving line. Just smile and move through quickly. Don't linger. Don't tell anyone your name unless they specifically ask. And please, for David's sake, don't mention that you're a teacher. These people don't really care about that sort of thing. That sort of thing. As if my life's work was something embarrassing, something to hide." I felt Emma's hand tighten around mine, and when I looked at her, I saw tears in her eyes. She knew. She knew how wrong this was. "Why am I coming to this dinner, David?" I asked, and my voice was steadier than I felt. "If I'm such an embarrassment, if you don't want anyone to know who I am, why did you invite me at all?" The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. David stared straight ahead. Vanessa examined her manicure. Finally, David said, "Because they specifically asked for you to be there." The words hung in the air like smoke. "They specifically asked for you to be there." "Who did?" I asked. "Who asked for me?" But David didn't answer. The car turned through an iron gate and started up a long driveway lined with old oak trees. Lights twinkled in the branches, and at the end of the drive, the Whitmore Estate rose up like something from another era, all white columns and glowing windows and the kind of grandeur that makes you feel small. My heart was pounding. Something was very wrong here. Someone had specifically asked for me to be at this dinner, but David didn't want anyone to know I was his mother. He didn't want me to talk, didn't want me to tell people I was a teacher, didn't want me to be anything except invisible. But you can't be invisible and specifically requested at the same time. Those two things don't fit together. And in my experience, when things don't fit together, it's because someone's trying to force a lie into the shape of truth. The car stopped in front of the entrance. The driver came around and opened the door. I could hear music drifting from inside, elegant and soft. I could see other guests arriving, women in expensive dresses, men in tailored suits. David got out first, then Vanessa. Emma gave me one last squeeze of the hand before she followed them. I sat there for just a moment longer, looking up at that grand building, and I thought about turning around. I thought about telling the driver to take me home, back to my small house on Maple Street, back to my quiet life where nobody asked me to pretend I was someone I wasn't. But then I remembered what I'd decided that afternoon. Keep your eyes open, Maggie. When people ask you to be invisible, it's because they're afraid of what you might see. So I stepped out of that car, straightened my navy dress, touched the pearls at my ears, and walked toward those glowing doors. I had no idea that the people inside were waiting for me. I had no idea that in less than an hour I'd understand exactly why David wanted me to stay silent. And I had no idea that everything, absolutely everything, was about to change. But I was about to find out. The entrance hall of the Whitmore estate took my breath away. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings that seemed impossibly high, and the marble floors gleamed like water under lamplight. Women in designer gowns moved like elegant birds through the space, their jewelry catching the light with every gesture. Men in expensive suits stood in clusters, holding glasses of champagne and laughing at jokes I couldn't hear. This was David's world now, I realized. This was what he'd become part of, and somehow I no longer fit into the picture. David moved ahead quickly, Vanessa on his arm like they were posing for a photograph. Emma stayed close to me, and I was grateful for her presence. A woman with a clipboard approached us, smiling in that professional way that never quite reaches the eyes. "Names, please?" she asked. David gave his name, then Vanessa's, then Emma's. He hesitated for just a fraction of a second before adding, "And Margaret Sullivan." The way he said my name, separate from his, like I was just another guest and not the woman who'd given birth to him, who'd raised him, who'd sacrificed everything so he could stand in rooms like this. The woman's head snapped up. She looked at me with sudden intensity, her professional smile transforming into something genuine. "Mrs. Sullivan?" she said, and there was something in her voice I couldn't quite identify. Surprise? Recognition? She checked her clipboard, running her finger down a list. Yes, you're here. Please come this way." She gestured toward a set of double doors that led deeper into the estate, but David stepped forward, blocking her path slightly. "We'll all go together," he said firmly. The woman looked confused. "But sir, Mrs. Sullivan is expected in the main dining room. The others are gathering in the south parlor for cocktails first." Now it was my turn to be confused. Why would I be expected in a different room than my own family? David's face had gone pale. "There must be some mistake," he said. She's just here as my guest. She can stay with us." The woman glanced at her clipboard again, then back at David with an expression that was almost pitying. "I'm sorry, sir, but Mrs. Margaret Sullivan is on the primary guest list. You and your party are on the secondary list. The seating arrangements have been very specifically planned." She turned to me again, and this time I saw something that looked like respect in her eyes. "Mrs. Sullivan, if you'll follow me. The others have been asking about you. The others have been asking about you." Those words echoed in my head as I felt all eyes turn toward me. David's face had gone from pale to red. Vanessa looked like someone had just told her the earth was flat. Emma squeezed my hand and whispered, "Go, Grandma. I think you should go." So I did. I followed that woman with the clipboard through those double doors, leaving my son standing there with his mouth slightly open, and I tried to ignore the way my heart was hammering against my ribs. The main dining room was even more magnificent than the entrance hall. A long table stretched down the center, set with china so delicate it looked like it might dissolve if you breathed on it too hard. Crystal glasses caught the candlelight, and flowers I couldn't even name spilled from silver vases. But it wasn't the room that made me stop in my tracks. It was the people in it. There were maybe 20 people gathered near the far end of the table, talking in small groups, and when I walked in, one of them turned and saw me. She was a woman in her 50s, elegant in a simple black dress, and her face broke into a smile so warm it almost hurt to look at. "Margaret!" she called out, and suddenly everyone was turning. Everyone was looking at me, and before I could process what was happening, they started clapping. The sound of applause filled that beautiful room, and I stood there frozen, absolutely frozen, because I had no idea what was happening. These people, these strangers in their expensive clothes, were applauding me. For what? Why? I looked behind me, thinking surely there was someone else, someone important who'd walked in behind me. But there was no one there. Just me in my navy dress and my late husband's pearls, feeling like I'd walked into the wrong dream. The woman in black approached me, still smiling, her hands reaching for mine. "Margaret Sullivan," she said, and her voice trembled slightly. "I cannot tell you how long I've wanted to meet you." I stared at her, searching her face for some recognition, but I'd never seen her before in my life. "I'm sorry," I managed to say, "but I think there's been some mistake. I don't know why I'm here." She laughed, but it was a kind laugh, not mocking. "Oh, Margaret, you really don't know, do you?" She turned to the others in the room. "She doesn't know." A murmur went through the group, a sound that was equal parts surprise and something that sounded like affection. An older man stepped forward, distinguished with silver hair and kind eyes. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, "my name is Richard Chen. I believe your son works for our company." Richard Chen, the name David had mentioned, the important client, the man this whole dinner was supposedly for. But he wasn't looking at David's absence with concern. He was looking at me like I was the guest of honor. "Mr. Chen," I said carefully, "I'm afraid I'm very confused. My son told me this was a business dinner. He told me to keep a low profile, not to talk to people, not to—" I stopped, realizing how pathetic it sounded. Not to exist, essentially. Not to be his mother. Richard Chen's expression darkened. "Did he now?" he said quietly. He exchanged glances with several others in the room, and I saw understanding pass between them, the kind of silent communication that comes from shared knowledge. "Mrs. Sullivan, I think we need to have a conversation. But first, please, let me introduce you to some people who've been waiting a very long time to meet you." One by one, they came forward. A woman named Patricia who taught at Yale, a man named James who ran a nonprofit in Bridgeport, a younger woman named Sarah who worked in technology. And with each introduction, each handshake, each warm smile, I felt more and more like I'd stepped through a looking glass into some alternate reality where I was someone important, someone valued, someone worth applauding. But I still didn't understand why. And somewhere in another room, my son was probably panicking, wondering what was happening, wondering why his carefully controlled evening was spinning out of his grasp. Part of me felt sorry for him. But a bigger part of me, the part that had been asked to be invisible, that had been told not to speak, that had been treated like an embarrassment, that part of me wanted to know the truth. "Mr. Chen," I said, my voice stronger now, "why am I here? Why did you ask for me specifically?" He smiled, but there was something sad in it. "Because, Mrs. Sullivan, you changed my life, and not just mine. You changed all of our lives, and we think it's time someone told you that." The room went quiet. Everyone was watching me, waiting, and I realized that whatever happened next was going to change everything. Richard Chen gestured toward the elegant dining table, and someone pulled out a chair for me. I sat down because my legs suddenly felt unsteady, and I watched as these strangers, these well-dressed, successful people, arranged themselves around me like I was someone worth gathering around. The woman in black, the one who'd greeted me first, sat to my right. She was still smiling, but now I could see tears in her eyes. "My name is Patricia Holden," she said softly. "Though you knew me as Patricia Martinez back when I was 17 years old and convinced I was going to drop out of Fairfield Academy." She paused, watching my face, waiting for recognition, and slowly, like fog clearing, I began to remember. A girl with dark hair and fierce eyes, sitting in my classroom after school, crying because her mother was sick and her father wanted her to quit school to help with the family business. A girl who'd written an essay about invisible women, about all the mothers and daughters who worked and sacrificed and disappeared into the background of other people's lives. "Patricia," I whispered, and she nodded, reaching for my hand. "You told me that my voice mattered," she said. "You told me that leaving school would be letting someone else write my story. You helped me apply for scholarships. You drove me to college interviews in your old car. You believed in me when nobody else did." She gestured to herself, to her elegant dress and confident bearing. "I'm a professor now, Margaret, at Yale. I teach literature to students just like I was. And every single time a student walks into my office ready to give up, I think of you. I felt something break open in my chest, some wall I'd built without realizing it. I remembered Patricia, of course I did, but I'd just been doing my job, hadn't I? Just being a teacher, helping a student who needed help. I'd never thought about it as changing a life. Richard Chen cleared his throat, and I turned to look at him. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mrs. Sullivan, I was in your English literature class in 1989. I was the quiet kid in the back row who never spoke unless you called on me. My parents had just immigrated from Taiwan, and I was failing every class except yours because I was terrified of making mistakes in English, of sounding stupid." He paused, and I saw his hands tighten slightly around his water glass. "You never made me feel stupid, not once. You told me that language wasn't about perfection. It was about communication, about sharing ideas. You gave me books to read, extra assignments that weren't about grades, but about finding my voice." I did remember him. Richard Chen, who'd sit in the back corner and write the most beautiful essays about identity and belonging, about being caught between two worlds. "You wrote about your grandmother," I said quietly, "about how she'd tell you stories in Mandarin that you couldn't quite translate into English, but you could feel their meaning anyway." His eyes widened, and he laughed, but it was a laugh that sounded close to tears. "You remember that? Margaret, that was 36 years ago. 36 years. The number hit me like a physical thing. Had it really been that long? "I remember all of my students," I said, and I realized it was true. Every face, every essay, every moment of breakthrough when a young person realized they had something important to say. A younger woman stood up then, the one who'd been introduced as Sarah. She looked nervous, twisting a napkin in her hands. "Mrs. Sullivan, you probably don't remember me. I was only in your class for one semester before my family moved. That was 2008. But you changed everything for me." She took a breath. "I was being bullied. Badly. Every day was torture, and I was planning—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I was planning to end it, to end everything. But you assigned us to write about a moment when we'd felt truly seen, truly understood. And I wrote about my grandmother teaching me to code, even though she didn't understand computers, because she believed I could do something important." I remembered. A quiet girl with sad eyes who turned in an essay that had made me cry in my empty classroom after school. I'd asked her to stay after class the next day, and we'd talked, just talked, about grandmothers and computers and finding reasons to keep going. I'd given her the phone number for the school counselor. I'd checked on her every day for the rest of that semester. "You saved my life," Sarah said simply. "And now I run a tech company that creates mental health apps for teenagers. We've helped over 2 million kids so far. Every single one of them exists because you took the time to see me when I felt invisible." The room was very quiet. I looked around at these faces, these successful, accomplished people, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt like I mattered, like my life had meant something beyond the small house on Maple Street, beyond the lonely dinners and the son who was ashamed of me. "There are 15 of us here tonight," Richard Chen said. 15 former students who've been trying to find a way to thank you. When I found out that David Sullivan worked for my company, when I realized he was your son, I thought it would be the perfect opportunity. I told him we wanted to honor you, to celebrate your retirement properly, the way Fairfield Academy should have done 8 years ago, but didn't. His voice hardened slightly. I assumed he'd be proud. I assumed he'd want to be part of this. The pieces were starting to come together, fitting into a picture that made my stomach turn. David had known. He'd known this dinner was for me, about me, to honor me. And he'd asked me to stay silent, to be invisible, to not tell anyone I was his mother. Why? What could possibly make a son so ashamed of his mother's accomplishments that he'd try to hide them? Patricia squeezed my hand. "Margaret, when we called David to arrange this, he seemed uncomfortable. He kept trying to downplay your career, suggesting that maybe a small private dinner would be better, that you wouldn't want the attention. We thought he was just being protective. But now—" She trailed off, looking toward the closed doors that separated this room from wherever David was waiting. James, the man who ran the non-profit, leaned forward. "Mrs. Sullivan, did your son tell you what this dinner was actually for?" I shook my head slowly. He told me it was a business dinner, that I should keep a low profile, that the people here were very important and I shouldn't try to join the conversations. I heard my voice break slightly on the last words, heard the hurt I'd been trying to hide even from myself. The expressions around the table ranged from shock to anger. Richard Chen stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Excuse me," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "I need to have a conversation with my employee." He walked toward the doors, and I wanted to stop him, wanted to tell him not to make a scene, not to embarrass David. But I didn't, because for the first time in years, someone was angry on my behalf. Someone thought I deserved better than to be hidden and silenced. The doors opened, and I heard voices from the other room, David's voice rising in that placating tone he used when he was trying to control a situation. And I sat there, surrounded by people whose lives I'd touched without even knowing it, and I realized something important. I'd spent so long trying to be small enough to fit into David's world that I'd forgotten I had my own world, a world where I mattered, where my words had weight, where the things I'd done had created ripples that spread farther than I'd ever imagined. But the question remained, why had David tried so hard to keep me from knowing that? The doors burst open and David walked in, his face flushed red, with Richard Chen right behind him. Vanessa followed, looking like she wanted to be anywhere else in the world, and behind them, my Emma, her young face twisted with an emotion I'd never seen on her before. It looked like disappointment. It looked like shame, but not in me, in her father. "Mom," David said, and his voice had that tight quality that meant he was trying very hard to stay calm. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. This dinner, it's not what you think. These people, they're—" But Richard Chen cut him off, and I'd never heard a voice go so cold so quickly. "Mr. Sullivan, I think you need to stop talking, right now." David's mouth snapped shut. I watched something I'd never seen before, my son being put in his place by someone who clearly held power over his career. Richard turned to me, and his expression softened. "Mrs. Sullivan, I apologize. When I arranged this evening, I was under the impression that your son would be proud to celebrate you. I had no idea he'd—" He paused, choosing his words carefully, "misrepresented the nature of this event." He looked back at David, and there was steel in his gaze. "Mr. Sullivan has been telling people in our company that his mother was a simple elementary school teacher who wouldn't understand the complexities of corporate business. He's been, for lack of a better word, hiding you." The words hit me like cold water. Simple elementary school teacher. I'd taught at one of the most prestigious preparatory academies in Connecticut. I'd published academic papers. I'd mentored hundreds of students who'd gone on to Harvard and Yale and Princeton. And my son had reduced all of that to simple. "David," I said quietly, and I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Is that true? Have you been telling people I was an elementary school teacher?" I watched him struggle, watched him try to find words that would make this better, that would explain it away. But there was no explaining this away. "Mom, it's not like that. I simplified things. People in my world, they don't really understand what prep school teaching is like. It's easier to just say, it's easier to make me smaller," I finished for him. "It's easier to make what I did seem less important so that you seem more impressive by comparison." The words came out before I could stop them, before I could soften them, and I saw him flinch like I'd struck him. But I wasn't done. 42 years of being polite, of being accommodating, of making myself smaller so other people could feel bigger. And I wasn't done. Emma stepped forward then, and her voice was shaking. "Dad, I heard what you told Mom in the car, that she shouldn't tell people she was a teacher, that these people wouldn't care." Tears were streaming down her face. "Grandma taught at Fairfield. I go to Fairfield. Half my teachers studied under her. Do you know how many times I've heard them talk about Mrs. Sullivan? About how she changed their lives? About how they became teachers because of her?" She looked at me with something like wonder. "I didn't know you were famous there, Grandma. You never told me." I hadn't told her because I'd never thought of myself as famous. I'd just been doing my job, teaching students, believing in them. But looking at these 15 faces around the table, these successful people who'd come here specifically to thank me, I realized that maybe Emma was right. Maybe I had been someone important, and I'd let my son convince me I wasn't. Vanessa spoke for the first time, her voice sharp. This is ridiculous. David was trying to protect you, Margaret. You don't understand how these corporate dinners work. People judge you based on your family, your background. He was trying to help you fit in. She said it like she believed it, like she'd convinced herself that hiding someone's accomplishments was an act of kindness. And maybe she had convinced David of the same thing. Patricia stood up, her professor voice coming through loud and clear. Mrs. Sullivan doesn't need to fit into anyone's world. The world should feel privileged that she's in it. She looked at David with something close to contempt. Your mother taught me that women don't have to make themselves small to be acceptable. She taught me that our voices matter, that our work matters, that we deserve to take up space. And you asked her to be silent? You asked her to hide who she is? You should be ashamed. The room erupted then, voices overlapping, people sharing their own stories about what I'd taught them, what I'd meant to them. James talked about how I'd encouraged him to pursue nonprofit work instead of the banking job his father wanted for him. Sarah talked about the essay I'd written in her college recommendation letter, words that had apparently moved the admissions committee to tears. One by one, they stood up and spoke, and with each story, I watched my son shrink a little more. But I wasn't watching him with satisfaction. I was watching him with something closer to heartbreak, because I was starting to understand. David had grown up in my shadow, the son of the beloved Mrs. Sullivan. He'd attended Fairfield Academy where every teacher knew me, where he was always Margaret Sullivan's boy. And instead of being proud, instead of basking in that reflected light, he'd resented it. He'd spent his entire adult life trying to step out of that shadow, trying to be someone impressive in his own right. And the only way he could figure out how to do that was to make me smaller, to diminish what I'd done so that his accomplishments would seem bigger. Richard Chen must have seen something in my face because he leaned down and said softly, Mrs. Sullivan, I need you to understand something. When David applied for his position with my company, his resume was impressive, but what really caught my attention was his last name. I looked him up, found out he was your son, and I thought, any man raised by Margaret Sullivan must have integrity, must have values. I hired him because of you. He straightened up and looked at David. But it seems I was wrong about what your mother taught you. David's face had gone pale. Mr. Chen, please, I can explain. This dinner, I thought if people knew she was my mother, they'd think I only got the job because of her. I wanted to prove myself on my own merits. His voice cracked. I wanted to be someone without being her son first. And there it was. The truth, finally. My son wasn't ashamed of what I'd done. He was ashamed that he couldn't escape it, that no matter how successful he became, he'd always be Margaret Sullivan's son first and David Sullivan second. He'd tried to erase me so he could finally be seen. The tragedy was, he'd been seen all along, just not in the way he wanted. The room fell silent after David's confession. I could hear the sound of my own breathing, the ticking of an antique clock somewhere in the corner, the rustle of fabric as people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Everyone was waiting for me to say something, to react, to either forgive my son or condemn him. But I didn't do either. Instead, I stood up slowly, smoothed down my navy dress, and looked at my son with eyes that I knew he wouldn't recognize. David, I said, and my voice was calm in a way that scared even me. You got the job because of me. You built your career in my shadow. And instead of being grateful, instead of acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, your mother's life's work opened doors for you, you tried to erase me. You didn't just hide me tonight. You've been hiding me for years. I paused, letting the words settle. When was the last time you invited me to a family dinner? When was the last time Emma was allowed to spend a weekend at my house? When was the last time you introduced me to your colleagues as your mother instead of just Margaret? He opened his mouth, but no words came out, because we both knew the answer. It had been years, years of gradual erasure, of slowly cutting me out of his life while still expecting me to show up with casseroles, to be available when he needed something, to be a mother when it was convenient, but invisible when it wasn't. Vanessa stepped forward, her face tight with anger. You're being dramatic, Margaret. David has been nothing but generous to you. He pays for your car insurance. He sends you money every month. He's taken care of you since Thomas died. She said it like money was love, like paying bills was the same as respecting someone, valuing them, wanting them in your life. Vanessa, I said quietly, David pays my car insurance because he's embarrassed that I drive a 12-year-old Toyota. He sends me money so I won't ask him for help in front of his friends. He hasn't taken care of me. He's been paying me to stay out of sight. The truth of those words hit me as I spoke them. All those checks, those deposits that appeared in my account with little notes saying, "Just a little extra, Mom," had been guilt payments. Hush money, in a way. Emma was crying openly now, and she came to stand beside me. Her hand found mine, and I felt her fingers interlock with my own. "Grandma, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know. They told me you were too tired for visits, that you needed your space, that you didn't really want to babysit anymore." She looked at her father with betrayal written across her young face. "You lied to both of us. You kept us apart." Richard Chen cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority. "Mr. Sullivan, I think you need to leave this dinner. This evening is about honoring Mrs. Sullivan, and your presence here is no longer appropriate." David's face went from pale to red to pale again. "Mr. Chen, please, let me explain. I can fix this. I can—" But Richard held up his hand. "You can leave, David. And on Monday morning, you can meet with me and HR to discuss your future with the company. A man who lies about his own mother's accomplishments is not someone I can trust in business." The words hung in the air like a sentence being passed. David's career, the thing he'd sacrificed our relationship for, was crumbling before his eyes. Part of me wanted to step in, to tell Richard Chen that it was fine, that David had made a mistake, but he didn't deserve to lose his job. That's what mothers do, isn't it? We protect our children, even when they don't deserve it, even when they've hurt us. But I didn't say anything. I stood there holding Emma's hand, and I let the consequences unfold, because maybe this was what David needed. Not protection, not rescue, but accountability. For the first time in his life, he was facing the real cost of his choices. Vanessa grabbed David's arm. "Come on," she hissed. "We don't need to stay here and be humiliated." She looked at me with something close to hatred. "I hope you're happy, Margaret. You've destroyed your son's career over your hurt feelings." She said hurt feelings like they were something trivial, something childish. Like being erased from your own child's life was just sensitivity, just overreaction. "Vanessa," Patricia spoke up, her professor voice cutting through the tension. "Margaret didn't destroy anything. David made his choices, and tonight those choices caught up with him. That's not destruction. That's justice." I felt something warm bloom in my chest at those words. Justice. Not revenge, not cruelty, but simple justice. The natural consequence of treating someone as disposable. David looked at me one last time, and I saw something in his eyes that might have been regret or might have been anger. "I was just trying to be my own person, Mom," he said, his voice breaking. "I was just trying to matter on my own. And despite everything, despite the hurt and the betrayal and the years of being made to feel small, my heart cracked a little, because I understood. I understood what it was like to feel invisible, to feel like you only mattered in relation to someone else. But understanding didn't mean accepting. Understanding didn't mean forgiveness came automatically. "David," I said softly, "you always mattered on your own. You just never believed it." He stood there for a moment longer, and I thought maybe he would say something else, something that would begin to bridge this gap between us. But Vanessa pulled at his arm again, and he turned and walked out of that beautiful dining room, out of that event that had been planned to honor me, out of the evening that had revealed more truth than any of us had been prepared for. The doors closed behind them, and the room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then James started clapping, slowly at first, then faster, and one by one, the others joined in. They were applauding again, but this time it wasn't just for what I'd done in the past. It was for what I'd just done in the present, for standing up for myself, for refusing to make myself small, for letting justice happen instead of rushing in to prevent it. I sat back down, suddenly exhausted, and Emma sat beside me, her head on my shoulder. "I'm not going home with them," she said quietly. Can I stay with you tonight, Grandma? At your house? I want to sleep in my old room, the one with the window seat where we used to read together. I kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. Of course, sweetheart. Of course you can stay. And surrounded by these 15 people who'd come to honor me, who'd shown me that my life had mattered more than I'd known, I finally let myself cry. But these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of recognition, of finally understanding that I didn't need my son's approval to know my worth. I'd had it all along. The morning after the dinner, I woke up in my own bed in my small house on Maple Street, and for a moment I thought maybe I'd dreamed the whole thing. But then I heard sounds from the kitchen, the clink of dishes and the smell of coffee, and I remembered. Emma was here. My granddaughter had come home with me, had slept in her old room, and was now making breakfast in my kitchen like she used to do every Saturday morning before Vanessa decided she was too busy for her grandmother. I got dressed and went downstairs, and there she was, 16 years old and cracking eggs into a bowl, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. When she saw me, she smiled, but her eyes were red from crying. I texted Mom last night, she said quietly. Told her I was staying here for a while. She said I was being disrespectful and dramatic. Emma's voice hardened. She said I needed to understand that adults make difficult choices and I was too young to judge. I sat down at my kitchen table, the one Thomas and I had bought at a yard sale 30 years ago, and I watched my granddaughter cook eggs in my old cast-iron skillet. Emma, sweetheart, I don't want to come between you and your parents. She turned to look at me, and the expression on her face was so fierce it reminded me of Patricia Martinez all those years ago. Grandma, they came between us, for years. I just didn't see it until last night. My phone had been buzzing all morning. I'd ignored it during my shower, but now I picked it up and looked at the screen. 12 missed calls from David, 6 voicemails, dozens of text messages. I opened the messages and read through them, watching the progression from anger to bargaining to something that might have been genuine remorse. The last one, sent at 3 a.m, just said, "Mom, I'm sorry. Please call me. I don't know how to fix this." I set the phone down without responding. I wasn't ready to talk to him yet. Maybe I wouldn't be ready for a long time. Emma brought over plates of scrambled eggs and toast, and we ate breakfast together in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that exists between people who don't need to fill every moment with words. After we finished, my phone rang again. This time, it was Patricia Holden. "Margaret," she said, her voice warm even through the phone. "I wanted to check on you. Last night was intense, and I know you must be processing a lot." I looked at Emma, who was washing dishes at my sink, and I felt something settle in my chest. "I'm okay," I said, and I realized it was true. I'm better than okay, actually. I feel like I've been holding my breath for years, and I finally let it out. Patricia laughed. "Good, that's good. Listen, I'm calling because the rest of us, the group from last night, we've been talking. We still want to honor you properly, Margaret. We want to establish a scholarship fund in your name at Fairfield Academy, the Margaret Sullivan Scholarship for students who need support, who need someone to believe in them the way you believed in us." My throat tightened. "Patricia, that's too much. You don't have to," but she cut me off gently. "We want to. You gave us everything, Margaret. Let us give something back." After I hung up, I sat there staring at my phone, trying to comprehend what was happening. A scholarship fund in my name. My students, these successful people I'd taught decades ago, wanting to honor me in a way that would help other students for years to come. It was overwhelming and humbling and beautiful all at once. The doorbell rang, and Emma went to answer it. I heard voices, Emma's and someone else's, and then she came back into the kitchen looking worried. "Grandma, it's Dad. He's here. He wants to talk to you." My stomach dropped. I wasn't ready. But I also knew that putting it off wouldn't make it easier. "Let him in," I said, and my voice was steadier than I felt. David walked into my kitchen, and I almost didn't recognize him. He looked like he hadn't slept, his hair uncombed, still wearing the same shirt from last night, but rumpled and untucked. His eyes were red, and when he saw me sitting at the table, he stopped in the doorway like he wasn't sure he was allowed to come closer. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what else to say except I'm sorry. Emma stood behind me, her hands on my shoulders, protective. I gestured to the chair across from me. Sit down, David. He sat, and I could see his hands shaking as he folded them on the table. Mr. Chen called me this morning, he said. I've been suspended pending an investigation. They're reviewing all my client relationships, checking if I misrepresented other things the way I misrepresented you. I waited for the guilt to come, the maternal instinct to make it better, to tell him it would be okay. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt something closer to sadness. Sadness for the man my son had become, for the choices he'd made that had led him here. David, why did you really ask me to stay silent last night? And don't tell me it was about your career. Tell me the truth. He was quiet for a long time, and I watched emotions play across his face like clouds passing over the sun. Finally, he said, because I was jealous. The words came out in a rush. I was jealous that all those people came to honor you, that you'd made such a difference in their lives, that they remembered you after all these years. And I thought, what have I done? What will anyone remember me for? I've made money, I've climbed the corporate ladder, but I haven't changed anyone's life. I haven't mattered the way you matter. Emma's hands tightened on my shoulders. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, and I saw him clearly for maybe the first time in years. He wasn't a villain. He was just lost, trying to find significance in all the wrong places, measuring his worth by the wrong metrics. David, I said softly, you could have mattered. You could have built on what I taught you, used the doors that opened for you because of my work to do something meaningful. Instead, you tried to slam those doors shut and pretend they'd never been open at all. He put his head in his hands, and his shoulders shook. My son was crying at my kitchen table, and I felt the pull to comfort him, to tell him it was all right, to make it better the way I'd done when he was small. But Emma's hands on my shoulders reminded me that I had someone else to think about now. Someone who'd been hurt by his choices, too. I want to fix this, Mom, David said through his tears. Tell me how to fix this. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at my small yard with its old oak tree and flower beds that needed weeding. I don't know if you can fix it, David. Not right away. Trust takes years to build and moments to destroy. You destroyed it. Now you have to decide if you're willing to do the work to build it back. He looked up at me, his face desperate. Anything. I'll do anything. I turned back to face him. Then start by being honest. Stop hiding who you are and where you came from. Stop measuring your worth by how much money you make or what title is on your business card. And most importantly, stop treating the people who love you like they're obstacles to your success. The words hung in the air between us, and I watched him absorb them. I didn't know if he would change. I didn't know if he could. But I'd said what needed to be said, and now it was up to him. What I did know was that I was done making myself small for anyone. Not for my son, not for anyone. I'd spent 73 years learning my worth, and I wasn't going to forget it again. 3 days after the dinner, I received a call from Fairfield Academy. The headmaster, Dr. William Reynolds, wanted to meet with me. I hadn't set foot in that building since my retirement party 8 years ago, the one where they'd given me a plaque and a gift card to a restaurant and sent me on my way after 42 years of service. I'd told myself at the time that it was fine, that I didn't need grand gestures, that the real reward was in the teaching itself. But if I was being honest, it had hurt. After 4 decades of pouring my heart into that institution, I'd expected something more than a handshake and a thank you. Emma insisted on coming with me. She'd been staying at my house all week, and Vanessa had stopped calling after the second day. I didn't know what that meant for their relationship, but I knew my granddaughter needed space from her parents right now, and I was grateful to give it to her. We drove to the campus together in my old Toyota, and I felt Emma's hand slip into mine as we walked up the familiar stone steps. Dr. Reynolds met us in his office, the same office where I'd sat countless times over the years discussing students, curriculum changes, and the future of education. He stood when we entered, and I saw something in his expression that looked like shame. "Margaret," he said, shaking my hand formally, "thank you for coming, and you must be Emma. I've heard wonderful things about you from your teachers." He gestured for us to sit, and then he took a deep breath. "Margaret, I'm going to be direct with you. In the past week, I've received over 30 phone calls and emails from your former students. Successful people, influential people, people whose donations have funded buildings and scholarships at this academy. And they're all telling me the same thing, that we failed you, that your retirement was inadequate, that we didn't honor you the way you deserve to be honored. He paused, choosing his words carefully. They're threatening to withdraw their support unless we make it right. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Dr. Reynolds, I don't want you to feel pressured. I don't want... But he held up his hand. Margaret, they're not wrong. We should have done better. You taught here for 42 years. You mentored hundreds of students. You published papers that changed how we think about literature education. And we gave you a plaque and let you walk away. He opened a folder on his desk. I'd like to propose something. We want to name the English department after you. The Margaret Sullivan English Department. We want to commission a portrait to hang in the main hall. And we want to create an endowed chair in your name. A position for a teacher who exemplifies the kind of dedication and excellence you showed for over 4 decades. The words washed over me like water, and I couldn't quite process them. Emma squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. Grandma, did you hear that? They're naming the English department after you. Her voice was full of pride and wonder, and I saw tears in her eyes. Dr. Reynolds smiled. There's more. Richard Chen and several of your other former students have pledged a significant amount of money to fund the Margaret Sullivan Scholarship. It will provide full tuition for 3 students every year, students who show promise but need financial support, just like many of your students did. I tried to speak, but my voice caught. I'd spent 8 years feeling invisible, feeling like my life's work had been forgotten, like I'd been quietly ushered off the stage to make room for younger teachers with newer ideas. And now, suddenly, I was being told that my work had mattered more than I'd known, that it was worthy of this kind of recognition. I don't know what to say, I finally managed. Say yes, Dr. Reynolds said simply. Let us do this right, Margaret. Let us show current students what dedication looks like, what a life devoted to education can mean. Let your legacy be visible instead of forgotten. Emma was openly crying now, and I realized I was too. After a moment, I nodded. Yes, I whispered. Yes, I'd be honored. That evening, back at my house, I finally answered one of David's calls. He'd been texting every day, asking to talk, promising he was making changes. When he picked up, his voice was subdued. Mom, thank you for answering. I know I don't deserve it. I sat in Thomas's old chair by the window, looking out at the oak tree in the yard. David, I got a call from Fairfield today. There was a pause. I heard, he said quietly. It's all over the alumni network. They're naming the English department after you. Mom, that's incredible. His voice sounded genuine, but I'd learned not to trust tone alone. Did you know about it? I asked. Did your former classmates contact you? He was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he finally said. 3 of them called me. They told me what they were doing, and they told me I should be ashamed for how I treated you. They were right. Another pause. Mom, I met with Mr. Chen yesterday. He's giving me one more chance. He said the only reason he's not firing me outright is because he believes you raised me better than I've been acting, and he wants to see if he's right. I closed my eyes. Part of me was relieved that David wasn't going to lose his job entirely. But another part of me wondered if real consequences might have taught him more than another chance would. What are you going to do with that chance, David? I asked. I'm starting therapy, he said. I told Mr. Chen I needed time to figure out why I've been so angry, so resentful. He agreed to let me take a leave of absence, unpaid, while I work on myself. He paused. And I told Vanessa that things need to change, that the way we've been treating you, the way we've been keeping Emma from you, it's not acceptable. She didn't take it well. What does that mean? I asked, though I thought I knew. It means we're separated, David said, his voice thick. She moved into our guest house yesterday. She said I'm throwing away everything we've built for the sake of my feelings, that I'm being manipulated by you and by my old school friends. I heard him take a shaky breath. But Mom, I realized something. I'd rather lose everything I've built on lies than keep living in a house that feels like a prison. I'd rather be alone than be with someone who thinks loving my mother is a weakness. I didn't know what to say to that. My son's marriage was falling apart, his career was hanging by a thread, and in some way, I was at the center of all of it. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because the truth had finally come to light. "David, I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "I never wanted any of this to happen." "I know," he said, "but maybe it needed to happen. Maybe I needed to lose everything to understand what actually matters." We talked for a few more minutes, carefully, like people navigating a minefield. When we hung up, I sat in Thomas's chair for a long time, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Emma came downstairs, freshly showered, wearing one of my old sweatshirts. "Was that Dad?" she asked. I nodded. "How is he?" I considered the question. "He's broken," I said honestly. "But maybe that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes we need to break before we can rebuild ourselves into something better." She sat on the arm of the chair, and I put my arm around her waist. "Grandma, do you think you'll forgive him?" she asked quietly. I thought about it, really thought about it. "I don't know, sweetheart. Forgiveness isn't something you can force. It's not a switch you flip. It's a process, and it takes time. What I do know is that I'm not going to make myself small anymore to make his life easier. If he wants a relationship with me, it has to be on terms where we both have dignity." Emma rested her head on my shoulder. "That's fair," she said. "That's more than fair." And sitting there in the growing darkness, with my granddaughter close and my future suddenly full of possibility, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt free. 2 months after the dinner that changed everything, I stood in front of Fairfield Academy on a bright Saturday morning in May. They'd scheduled the dedication ceremony for the Margaret Sullivan English department, and the campus was full of people I hadn't seen in years. Former colleagues, students from decades past, and faces I recognized but couldn't quite place until they introduced themselves and shared memories I'd forgotten, but they'd carried with them. Emma stood beside me, looking beautiful in a dress she'd picked out herself, not one Vanessa had chosen for her. She'd been living with me for 6 weeks now, and my house no longer felt quiet or empty. It felt alive again, full of the sounds of a teenager getting ready for school, music playing from upstairs, late-night conversations over tea about boys and college plans and what it means to be strong. Vanessa had tried to force her home twice, but Emma had stood firm. She was almost 17, old enough to make her own choices about where she wanted to live, and she'd chosen me. David was there too, standing awkwardly near the back of the gathering. He'd been out of work for 2 months, using the time for therapy 3 times a week, and, according to his texts, trying to figure out who he was without the title and the salary and the image he'd built. He looked different. Thinner, maybe. Or maybe just lighter somehow, like he'd been carrying something heavy and finally set it down. We'd had coffee twice in the past month, careful conversations where we both walked on eggshells, both trying to find our way back to something that resembled a relationship. Vanessa wasn't there. The divorce papers had been filed 3 weeks ago. David told me she'd said he'd chosen his mother over his wife, over his family, over everything they'd built together. He'd told her that wasn't true, that he'd chosen honesty over lies, but she couldn't see the difference. Some people can't, I suppose. Some people build their lives so completely on image and performance that when you ask them to be real, they don't know how. Dr. Reynolds called everyone to attention, and I felt my heart start to race. Public speaking had never bothered me in a classroom, but this was different. This was personal. Patricia stood with Richard Chen and James and Sarah and all the others who'd been at that fateful dinner, and they were all smiling at me with something that looked like love. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Reynolds began, "we're here today to correct an oversight, to honor someone who should have been honored long ago. For 42 years, Margaret Sullivan walked these halls and changed lives. She didn't just teach literature. She taught students how to find their voices, how to believe in themselves, how to see their own worth. And today, we ensure that her legacy will be visible for generations to come." He unveiled a portrait that made me gasp. It wasn't a formal, stuffy painting. It was me in my classroom, surrounded by books, captured mid-laugh with students visible in the background. The artist had somehow caught something essential, some quality I'd never seen in my mirror, but apparently others had seen in me. Joy, purpose, Connection. "The Margaret Sullivan English Department," Dr. Reynolds announced, and applause erupted. I watched through tears as they revealed a plaque on the building, my name in brass letters that would outlive me, that would tell future students that once there was a teacher here who mattered enough to be remembered. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the podium on shaking legs. I looked out at all those faces, at the life I'd lived reflected back at me through the people I'd touched, and I felt overwhelmed by the enormity of it. "I don't have a prepared speech," I said, my voice trembling. I didn't know what to say because I still don't quite believe this is real. For 8 years, I thought I'd been forgotten. I thought my work had been a small thing, important only to me. But you've shown me that's not true. You've shown me that the work we do with love, the attention we give to others, the belief we offer when people can't believe in themselves, those things ripple outward in ways we can never fully see. I paused, looking at David standing in the back, his face wet with tears. Someone told me recently that they'd been living in my shadow, and they needed to step out of it to become their own person. And I understand that impulse. But what I've learned is that shadows aren't the enemy. Shadows mean there's light somewhere, light strong enough to cast them. And if my life has cast a shadow, I hope it's been one that others could rest in when they needed shelter, not one that blocked their sun. Emma was crying openly now, and I saw her reach out and take her father's hand. He looked surprised, then grateful, and he held on to her like she was a lifeline. "To every student here today," I continued, "I want you to know that your worth isn't measured by your salary or your title or how impressive you look on paper. Your worth is measured by how you treat people, by the kindness you offer, by the lives you touch with your presence. Don't wait until you're 73 years old to understand that. Don't spend years making yourself small so others can feel big. Take up space. Be proud of who you are. And most importantly, be kind to the people who love you, because love is the only thing that lasts." The applause that followed was deafening, but I barely heard it. I was watching David push through the crowd toward me, his face crumpled with emotion. When he reached me, he pulled me into a hug, and I felt him shake with sobs against my shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered into my hair. "I'm so sorry I tried to dim your light. I'm so sorry it took me this long to see how bright you shine." I held my son, this broken man who was trying to rebuild himself into someone better, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. Maybe the willingness to walk toward it. "I know you are," I said softly. "And I see you trying, David. I see you doing the work. That matters." We stood there for a long moment, mother and son, while photographers took pictures and people waited patiently. When we finally stepped apart, Emma was there, and she put her arms around both of us, creating a circle of 3. "We're going to be okay," she said, with the certainty only a teenager can have. "We're all going to be okay." And standing there in the sunshine with my name on a building and my family in my arms, I thought maybe she was right. Maybe we would be okay. Not the same as we were before, but something new, something built on truth instead of lies, on respect instead of shame. That evening, after the ceremony and the reception and all the congratulations, I sat in my living room with Emma. David had gone home, back to his big empty house to continue the work of figuring out who he was. My phone was full of messages from former students, from colleagues, from people whose lives had intersected with mine in ways I'd forgotten, but they remembered. "Grandma," Emma said, "can I ask you something?" I nodded. "Do you think Dad will really change? Or is this just temporary, just until everyone forgets what happened?" It was a good question, an important one. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Change is hard, and it's easy to slip back into old patterns when the pressure's off. But I think he wants to change, and that's the first step. Whether he follows through, whether he does the work even when it's difficult, that remains to be seen." She was quiet for a moment. "I want to believe he will," she said finally. "But I'm not going to forget what he did. I'm not going to let him treat you that way again." I pulled her close. "Good," I said. "That's exactly right. Hope for the best, but maintain your boundaries. Love people, but don't let love be an excuse for accepting poor treatment. She rested her head on my shoulder, and we sat there in the quiet of my small house, and I thought about everything that had changed in 2 months. I'd gone from being invisible to being honored. I'd gone from being ashamed of taking up space to having a building with my name on it. I'd gone from accepting crumbs of affection from my son to demanding genuine respect. And the most surprising thing of all was that the world hadn't ended when I stopped making myself small. In fact, it had expanded. It had opened up in ways I never could have imagined. It's been 6 months now since that March evening when my son asked me to be invisible. 6 months since I walked into a room expecting to disappear and instead found myself surrounded by people who remembered me, who valued me, who saw me in ways I'd forgotten to see myself. And if you'd told me then where I'd be today, I'm not sure I would have believed you. I'm sitting in my small house on Maple Street, the one Thomas and I bought 45 years ago, the one David used to say I should sell for something more appropriate for my age. But I'm not selling it. This house holds memories in every corner, love in every room, and I've learned that you don't abandon the places where you've been happy just because someone else thinks you should. Emma's upstairs doing homework, music drifting down the stairs, and in a few minutes I'll call her down for dinner. It's Wednesday, which means David is coming over. He comes every Wednesday now, and we eat together and talk, carefully rebuilding something that broke but maybe needed to break so it could be built back stronger. You know, when you're in the middle of pain, when someone you love is treating you like you don't matter, it's hard to see a way forward. It's hard to imagine that one day you'll be on the other side of it, that the hurt will transform into something else, something that looks like wisdom or strength or peace. But here's what I've learned in my 73 years, and especially in these past 6 months. Pain is a teacher, but only if you're willing to learn from it instead of just endure it. David didn't lose his job, though it was close. Richard Chen gave him a second chance, but it came with conditions. David had to complete 6 months of therapy, had to take a professional ethics course, and had to write a formal apology to the company explaining what he'd done and what he was doing to change. He did all of it. He's still doing the work, still showing up to therapy every week, still learning that his worth isn't tied to his title or his salary or how impressive he looks to strangers at dinner parties. His marriage didn't survive, but I think maybe it wasn't meant to. Vanessa wanted a husband who would prioritize image over integrity, who would keep his mother small so she could feel big. And David finally understood that he couldn't be that person anymore, not if he wanted to look at himself in the mirror and recognize who he saw. The divorce was finalized last month, and while I know it caused him pain, I also saw relief in his eyes. Sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted is the only way to figure out what you actually need. Emma is thriving. She's applying to colleges now, and she's written her application essay about what she learned from watching her grandmother refuse to be diminished. She's written about dignity and boundaries and the courage it takes to demand respect from the people who should have given it freely all along. When I read it, I cried. Not because it was about me, but because I realized I'd given her something valuable without even knowing it. I'd shown her what it looks like to stand up for yourself, even when it's hard, even when it costs you something. The Margaret Sullivan Scholarship has already been awarded to 3 students at Fairfield Academy. I met them last month, these bright young people who remind me why I spent 42 years teaching. One wants to be a writer. One wants to be a civil rights attorney. One isn't sure yet what she wants to be, but she knows she wants to make a difference. I see myself in all of them, and I see hope for a future where maybe more people will understand that success isn't measured in dollars or titles, but in lives touched and kindness offered and truth spoken even when it's uncomfortable. People ask me sometimes if I've forgiven David. It's a complicated question, and I don't have a simple answer. I'm learning that forgiveness isn't a moment, it's a process. It's not about pretending something didn't hurt or didn't matter. It's about choosing, day by day, to walk toward healing instead of staying locked in bitterness. Some days I feel closer to forgiveness than others. Some days I look at my son and feel only love and pride for how hard he's working to change. Other days I remember how it felt to be asked to hide who I was, and the hurt is fresh again. But we keep showing up, keep talking, keep trying, and that feels like enough for now. Here's what I want you to understand, honey. You who's listening to this story, You are not too much. You are not too loud, too proud, too accomplished, too educated, too anything. You don't need to shrink yourself to make other people comfortable. You don't need to hide your light to avoid casting shadows. The people who love you, the people who truly see you, they won't ask you to be smaller. They'll celebrate your bigness. They'll be proud of your achievements. They'll want the world to know who you are and what you've done. And if someone in your life is asking you to be invisible, asking you to stay silent, asking you to pretend you're less than you are, that's not love. That's control. That's fear. And you deserve better. We all deserve better. It took me 73 years and a night of humiliation to fully understand that, but I understand it now, and I'm not going back. My phone is full of messages from former students, people I taught 30, 40 years ago who found their way back to me. They tell me stories about moments in my classroom that I don't remember, but that changed their lives. They tell me about advice I gave that they've carried with them for decades. And every message reminds me that we never really know the full impact of our lives, the ways our words and actions ripple out into the world and touch people we might never see again. That dinner in March wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I take up space unapologetically, where I speak my truth even when it's uncomfortable, where I remember that my worth isn't determined by how others treat me, but by how I treat myself. I spent too many years accepting crumbs of affection, convincing myself that small kindnesses were enough, that I should be grateful for any attention at all. But I'm done with crumbs. I'm done with small. I'm done with invisible. I'm 73 years old, and I finally understand what it means to matter. Not because someone else told me I matter, but because I decided it for myself. And that decision has changed everything. So now, I want to hear from you. I want to know that this story reached you, wherever you are. Down there in the comments, tell me what city you're watching from. Tell me if any of this resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever had to fight to be seen. Tell me you're there, honey, because knowing our stories connect us across distance and time, that matters so much. I'm Maggie Sullivan, and this is my story. Not the story someone else told about me, but the story I'm telling myself. The story where I'm not a background character in someone else's life, but the protagonist of my own. And if you're feeling invisible right now, if someone is asking you to be smaller than you are, I want you to know, your story matters too. Tell it. Live it. Don't let anyone convince you to hide your chapters or edit out your best parts. You are enough. You have always been enough. And you don't need anyone's permission to take up space in this world. Remember that, sweetheart. Remember that. And hold on to it, and don't ever let it go.